So go ahead.
All right, thanks so much. I would love to formally introduce myself. My name is Mary McCarley, and I am the Health Education Content Specialist with Goodheart Willcox. I'm also the co-author of their middle school health textbook. I was a teacher for 15 years in Charlotte Mecklenburg schools as a high school health teacher, and I now provide professional development and training for our middle school and high school health titles. I absolutely love to present at conferences and any opportunity I have to share strategies with teachers. So this presentation is titled 10 Ways to Create an SEL Skills-Based Health Classroom. But with us today is also Rick Ditzel. And Rick Ditzel is the Ohio Educational Consultant with Goodheart Willcox. So Rick, if you want to say a quick hello to the group, and then we'll get started with the presentation.
Hey everybody, hope to see you sometime soon. I'm based out of Mason, outside of the Cincinnati area. So please let me know if there's anything I can do for you during this time of remote blended hybrid learning, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thanks, Rick. So I just want to point out that all the activities that you do see in today's presentation, they actually come from our middle school and our high school health skills-based health program. And I am the co-author of the middle school health textbook. These are the activities I used in my classroom for years. And I did reach out to Diane Farthing, who is the co-author of our high school book and also the 2020 Shape America Western District of the Teacher of the Year. And I asked her if I could add some resources from the high school program as well. So everything you do see in today's presentation do come from our published middle school and high school health programs. However, you guys do have access to this PowerPoint presentation. So we want you to leave with lots of new activities and strategies that you can use in your classroom to create an SEL skills-based health classroom. So I think I just mentioned this is our award-winning author team. All the activities and assessments that are in our program were actually developed by our award-winning teacher team. So most of us are Shape America District and National Teacher of the Years. So let's get started. These are the 3 SEL skills that I'm going to focus on in today's presentation. So responsible decision-making, positive relationships, and self-management. And with each one of these skills, you're going to see lots of different activities that you could use with your students. Many of these you can definitely adapt to a remote learning environment. So if you do feel like I'm moving a little bit too fast, or I know you're not going to be able to read everything on the screen, just know that you do have access to this PowerPoint. So you may just kind of want to jot down a list of the ones you kind of want to go back and revisit and take a closer look at. So let's first start with responsible decision making. So when I teach the decision-making process, these are the 5 steps I teach, starting with identifying the decision, brainstorming options. Step 3, identify possible outcomes, make a decision, and reflect on your decision. So let's look at some activities you can do with your students. So I love doing activities with my students that kind of set them up into real life situations that they may be in at some point in time in their lives. So the activity you're seeing right now is one that I developed as part of our middle school health program and one that's in our workbook. So this is one that I would do very early on with my students when they're starting to practice this skill of decision making. I believe that when students are especially very early on in practicing a skill, I think it does help with their confidence and then, their confidence level, and then also just to kind of talk through it and work through it is if you can do it with a partner. So I do this activity with a partner. You'll see that there's 3 scenarios. I like to provide choice. So the student with a partner is going to read the following 3 scenarios and then just choose one of the scenarios and record what scenario they chose. Now with a partner, they're going to go through those steps in the decision-making process. This one, you can see that in step 2, they're only having to come up with 2 possible options in the pros and cons or advantages and disadvantages of each option. Since this is a really early on, I really just kind of want them to talk through the steps, make sure that they understand the steps, and record their responses. So let's look at another maybe more detailed activity. So this one is titled, What Would You Do? And it once again is going to get students to go through those steps in the decision-making process. So I'm going to provide the scenario for them. And step 1, they're going to identify the decision that needs to be made. Now, during step 2, if you remember from this activity, they only had to come up with at least 2 possible options. Now, in this one, we're going to just take this and start to advance this skill a bit more. Now, in step 2, they're going to have to brainstorm all possible options that Sasha or the individual can take to find a solution to the decision. And I still, because it is very early on in this process, I still would probably do this activity with a partner. And now for those options, they're going to come up with the best and worst case scenarios or the pros and cons for each one of those options. So here's another activity. I really do like this activity, and since students have had a chance to practice on 2 occasions the decision-making process with a partner, I would actually do this assignment independently first and see how they do, and then let them debrief with a partner and add to their answers or change some of their responses. So in this activity, students are going to be looking at an example of a decision that someone made using the decision-making process. And for this assessment, they're going to review the steps that this person used to make a decision. Now, they're going to place a star, you can see in the directions here, a star beside steps that were done well, and circle areas that need improvement. And for those circled items, they're going to give suggestions for performing the step even better. So you can see that they're going to review someone else's answers and once again put a star next to the ones that they feel like they did well, and then circle the ones that they feel like need improvement and then make suggestions. So once again, I mean, I do have my students do an activity like this independently first, and then once they're done with a partner, debrief, share their answers, make changes as needed or add to their responses. So this is a decision-making template, and this is a template that we've included in our high school program. With this template, it really can be used in any topic or subject area within health because it really is just a template. So you can use it for any kind of decision that needs to be made, whether it's related to nutrition or fitness or stress management or sexual health or tobacco, alcohol, and drugs. So, you know, if you do feel like students are ready to do this independently, you can have them do it independently. If you do feel like they still need a little bit more practice within a small group or with a partner, you could do that too. So for this template, students are basically going to go through the decision-making process, starting with identifying a decision or problem that needs to be made and solved. So they'll basically just go through the steps in the decision-making process. And these little blue boxes that you see, we have everything available in digital, so you're seeing the form fields that students would be typing in. So often, many of my students have stated over the years that while they really do understand the decision-making process and they can go through the steps in the decision-making process, when they're in real-world situations, it's not the decision-making process that causes them to make a bad decision. It is often their lack of refusal skills and their insecurity with assertive communication. So when I teach the decision-making process, I also create opportunities for students to practice assertively responding to situations and working on this important skill of refusal. So in this activity, you'll see here, I titled this, "What Would You Do and Say?" This is actually one of our middle school workbook pages, but it sets up scenarios such as this. So your partner sends the following text message to you: "Come over, I have a surprise." You bike over only to realize the surprise is that the parents are not home and you have the house to yourself. Your partner has dimmed the lights and lit candles. So what do you do and what do you say to assertively respond to these sexual advances? And I love actually doing these activities with a partner. You think about the classroom environment, at least in a typical classroom environment, when we are at school, we think of this as kind of a safe place for students to practice these types of situations that they'll be in. So we want to create a comfortable, controlled environment where students can talk about these scenarios with a partner. It also practices getting them to talk about potentially awkward subjects and also working on the skill of interpersonal communication. So I would do with this activity, I would say you've got 7 minutes with a partner, I want you to read the following scenarios. What do you do and what do you say to assertively respond and clearly communicate no within this relationship? So give them about 7 minutes, and then as a class, I want them to share out, and for a couple different reasons. And you could, if you're doing this via Zoom, you could do this in a breakout room or within a small group in a breakout room. But that share out piece, when the class comes back together, is really important. Kids know that they're going to be in these kind of situations. And let's imagine that I'm working with my partner and I have an answer. I'm just not completely committed to that answer. And I know it's probably not the best thing to do. So by listening to my classmates and allowing them to share their responses, it really does give me new ideas, kind of extra tools for my toolbox, because I know I'm going to be in that situation at some point in time. So let's continue to advance this idea of refusal skills and looking at another activity. So here's another activity. So this time, rather than reading a scenario, let's imagine the pressure is coming to you. So I tell my students, with a partner, you've got 7 or 8 minutes. I want you to read the following statements. And imagine right now you are being pressured. And you can see the example I've used, the pressure to engage in a sexual behavior that they don't want to do. You could do this exact same activity with the pressure to vape, the pressure to drink, the pressure to do a drug. So just know that even though I'm using the example of practicing continuous abstinence, you could use this type of activity and format on another topic. So for example, your partner says to you, "We've been together for months. I care about you so much and want us to be able to share this special moment together." What is your response? So with a partner, you've got 7 or 8 minutes. I want you to read the following scenarios and how can you assertively communicate no in this relationship? And if I do provide, you can see that I've provided my students 6 different statements. I do really try to encourage them to come up with 6 different ways to assertively communicate no. And then after those 7 or 8 minutes, I would ask my students to share their responses. And so for each question, maybe just call on 2 or 3 students to share their responses, giving other students kind of extra tools for their toolbox. And when students do volunteer, even if it's via Zoom, I would ask them to make sure that both their voice, their body language assertively communicates no. So let's continue to advance this skill. So this is one of my students' favorite activities, and I do these often. It's just not with this topic. It might be with this topic. I do this also with within the alcohol unit, the tobacco and vaping unit, and also drug unit. So now the students have had a chance with a partner on 2 separate occasions. They looked at some scenarios and responded assertively communicating no, and also pressure lines. Now I ask my students to imagine right now that I'm going to pressure you. You won't have a chance to talk with your partner ahead of time, and you also won't have a chance to see the line ahead of time. So I'm going to pressure you, and I want you to assertively communicate no. So what I do ahead of time is I've written down the top 10, and you can Google it, the top 10 pressure lines or the top 10 lines that someone's going to hear to vape, to drink alcohol, to do a drug, to have sex. And I'll pick it out of a bag, and then I look at the students and I read it. And when I read it, there's always going to be this kind of awkward silence. And that's a good thing, because you want students to process what they would say if they were actually in that situation. So allow that kind of awkward silence to happen, and then ask for a volunteer. When someone does volunteer, I always encourage my students to imagine that they're actually in this situation. So both their verbal and nonverbal communication should assertively communicate no. And if you can, maybe call on a couple of students so that the other students who may be a bit insecure with this skill can hear their classmates assertively responding no. And it will come up. I'm not really sure in a Zoom situation if this is going to come up, but in a classroom situation, my students are very eager to, quote, pick from the bag. And so if you do have students who want to pick from the bag, my suggestion is, as I think it's an excellent activity, as long as you have good classroom management, there's respect in your classroom, and before, let's just say, Johnny picks from the bag, I would say, who would like to receive Johnny's pressure? I never want to have Johnny put a student on the spot who's not ready to receive that pressure. So let's just say another student raises their hand. I then say, okay, Johnny, you can pick into the bag, look at this student and pressure that student to do whatever the activity is. And then Johnny will put pressure on the student, and the student will respond. I like this because it really does put students in a real life situation where one is pressuring another and they need to respond, but it's in a controlled, comfortable classroom environment. So here's another idea for getting students to practice, in this case, refusing. So I found over the years that I know that differentiation is important, and sometimes differentiating by skill level or differentiating a skill can be difficult. So here's an activity, and what you're seeing right now is actually the dessert section of a project that I do with my students. There's an appetizer, there's an entree, and there's a dessert. And all the desserts are all skills-based. And this skill, as you can obviously see, it's the practicing refusal skills, or the skill of interpersonal communication. So all desserts are done with a partner. So with a partner, they're going to read the following three options. And you can see that all of them are the same for the most part. So for example, write a scenario in which a teen tries to pressure his or her partner to have sexual intercourse or sexual behavior. In the scenario, the person being pressured should respond in three different ways, clearly communicating no. Now, I know this one relates to sexual behaviors, but if that's not something that you're teaching, or maybe you're on the topic of vaping or alcohol or drugs, the idea is I'm presenting a strategy that you could kind of change and make your own. So I actually do this exact same activity with vaping as well. So I want one student to pressure the other, and I want that student to respond in three different ways, clearly communicating no. Now, we know that not all students learn the same. So I want to differentiate by learning style as students practice this skill. All three activities are the same, but how a student practices it is going to be a little different. The two students who would prefer not to volunteer in class or stand up in front of the class are going to choose this option, this first option. So they're going to practice refusing with a partner, but then they're going to turn in their scenario and their responses to the teacher. These two students who choose option number 2 are going to do the exact same activity, but instead they'll just raise their hand and they'll demonstrate their refusal lines for the class. Then, of course, you always have the two students who would prefer to do a skit. So they like to stand up in front of the class. They like to act. This is the way that they learn, and they're going to perform a skit for the class. So in a remote learning environment, you'd obviously have to modify this a bit to accommodate this activity via Zoom. So, I know all school districts are different, but when I was a teacher in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, I had 9 weeks with my students. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, how am I supposed to cover all this content, this skill? I need to practice the skill. There's so many standards, and it just never felt like there was ever enough time to get it all done. And at least in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, they have health for 9 weeks, and that's it. And most of them take it as a 9th grader. So I felt like I needed to do some more. I needed more for my students. I needed to strengthen their support system. So when they left my class, I always tell my students to come back, ask me questions. I'm here for you. But the reality is most of them don't come back. And so I wanted to create opportunities in my class to strengthen their support system. So very early on in my teaching career, I came up with what I called my Let's Talk series. So you can see now it's actually as part of both our middle school and our high school program with Goodhart Wilcox. But they're basically short homework assignments to engage families, to extend learning home, to strengthen support systems. And in part 1, they're going to read the following together, the child and the adult are going to read the following 2 scenarios. And you can see this one is on responsible decision making. They're going to read the following 2 scenarios. They're just going to choose one, and together they're going to talk about what would you do, create a plan if you're ever in this situation. And the child is the one that writes the paragraph. I've actually just shortened the response line so that you guys could go back and look at these examples and get ideas. But the child is the one that writes the paragraph. And then in part 2, you can see that there's 6 questions, but they only have to discuss 2 of the questions with their parent, guardian, or trusted adult. So they can kind of pick and choose which questions they want to talk about. And then the child is the one that writes the summary and the reflection, and the parent, guardian, or trusted adult signs the pledge. So in my 15 years of teaching, this is definitely what I'm most proud of as a teacher. And if you've not found opportunities to engage families, I would definitely suggest to kind of go back, take a closer look at these when you do have time, and see how you could maybe incorporate some of these in your classroom. And I've actually included a couple different examples in this presentation. So I know this one does relate to relationships and responsible sexual decisions, but there's going to be some others that will come up very soon in today's presentation. So this is actually one of my favorite activities. In a remote learning environment, this could be quite challenging, so you may want to hold on to this activity until you return to school. So I love to create opportunities for my students to advocate, to campaign, to try to empower others to make healthy decisions. So since they worked on this decision-making process and this skill for themselves, now I want them to empower others to make a healthy decision. So this is a small group advocacy campaign project, and it's part of our middle school program. And when I wrote it, I was intentional about keeping it kind of vague enough so that a teacher can use it on several different topics or the topic of their choice. So in step 1, the students are going to choose a topic, and I do encourage you to do this like within a small group. I think they're going to generate more ideas, and I think it could be successful and empowering for the students to be able to work together. So in step 1, they're going to choose a topic. So before they choose their topic, they're going to kind of discuss the needs of their school community, kind of what's happening, and they're going to decide on a topic that they're passionate about, that they want to campaign about, that they want to encourage others to make healthy decisions about. And they'll record their topic, their campaign topic here. Now in step 2, they're going to start to learn about their topic. And so they're going to research accurate, up-to-date, valid sources to learn more about their topic. And this information will kind of serve as the foundation of knowledge for their campaign. And then also, I'm going to encourage them to talk with a teacher, school staff member, administrator to learn about what's currently being done at your school to address this issue. So they'll record their research notes here, and then they would record what current actions are being done at their school to address this issue here. Now, step 3, it's time to create their campaign goal. So you can see I have a series of questions so that they can kind of plan their campaign goal. So first off, who are you trying to reach and influence? What message do you want to convey? Why is this message important? And what specific goal or goals do you hope to achieve? Once they've answered those, then I tell my students, well, it's time to create your product, because most campaigns, they have some sort of product that you're going to use to help to raise awareness. But we know that not all students learn the same. So while you're going to have some students that would love to design posters and hang them all over school, you're going to have other students who don't learn that way and maybe would prefer to do like a public service announcement that they put on the morning announcements, or a series of social media posts, or maybe a blog or article for the school website. So this is called a product choice board. I use these often. And whenever I give a project of some sort, rather than having all students do the same type of product, I put a choice board there so that students can pick and choose what product best serves their needs. Thus, it's being differentiated by learning style. In the center, I like to include student choice. So this just allows students to be creative. They come up with some amazing ideas that I would have never have thought of. So students are going to create their product, and they're going to pick what type of product they want, and then make sure that these bullet points make it in their product. Now it's time to launch their campaign. But before they launch it, they're going to need to respond to the following questions. Why is this the best product option for your campaign? What do you need to make your campaign possible? Who do you need to make it possible? And how will you reach your audience? What's your timeline? And how will you determine success? Once they've answered those questions, then it's time to launch it. This is obviously going to be very challenging in a remote learning environment, so maybe wait and hold on to this till you return to school. But you could do like a virtual health fair, I guess. But I know that not all schools, once you return to schools, are super excited about students campaigning. If your school allows it, it's great. If your school doesn't allow it, then maybe consider like a health fair. Sorry about that. Maybe consider a health fair where you get students together to campaign at a health fair. So once students are done, they're going to reflect. So after they complete it within their group, were you successful at implementing a meaningful campaign? And they'll provide a detailed response. What obstacles did you encounter, and how did you overcome those obstacles? And what did you learn from doing this campaign? So I put the rubric in that I use. That's also part of our middle school program if you need a scale to assess students. So let's move on to the next SEL skill, which is establish and maintain positive relationships. And don't forget, if you are joining us late, then this PowerPoint will be made available to you guys. So I know it's a lot of information, and I wanted to include as many activities as I possibly could in the time that I had. So maybe jot down some notes as to what activities you kind of want to go back and revisit or try in your classroom. And then when you have access to the PowerPoint, you could go back and take a closer look. So the next skill is establish and maintain positive relationships. So this is actually an activity from within the pages of the textbook. And this activity really gets students to start to think about what they want out of a peer relationship. So let's first kind of start on the topic of peer relationships. So they're going to start to set expectations. So for this activity, you could do it as a class discussion, a journal write, a think, pair, share. But really you want your students to just think about what characteristics they're really looking for in a friend. And what do they bring to the friendship? And once you've had a chance to talk about that, either in small groups or a full class discussion, get students to set 2 SMART goals that could help them make a relationship stronger in their life. So students are starting to set some expectations and think about what they really want out of a friendship, what characteristics they're looking for. And in this next activity, still related to peer relationships, now I want my students to learn from their friends and their peers. What do their friends and peers want out of a relationship? So what you're seeing now is, I call it the peer relationship survey, and this is actually one of our middle school workbook pages. And there's actually several different surveys on different topics, but this one relates to peer relationships. So what I ask my students to do is I want them to talk to 5 of their closest friends or peers and ask them the following questions. And I really do encourage them, don't just ask the question and record the answer, but instead try to continue the conversation, dig a little bit deeper to see what they have to say about it. So for example, what is the most important quality you look for in a close friend? And then they would talk to, maybe they start with the person 1 and they ask person 1 each of the following 4 questions and record their responses, and then they move on to the next person. If they have a friend group of 5, maybe they get them on the phone or they meet and they all talk about one question at a time while they record their responses. Then the student, I want them to reflect. So they're going to examine their the answers. What results did you find interesting or most surprising? And what did you learn from surveying your friends? Are there ways that you could better strengthen your friendship? So still on the topic of peer relationships, moving on to getting students to kind of think about what they can do to develop healthy friendships and some of those strategies that they could use. So you're seeing here 2 workbook pages from our high school program. You can see in the top right corner, the skill is addressed as well. And in both of these activities, students are going to kind of take a closer look and really think about some strategies for developing a healthy friendship. So in this activity on the left-hand side, It says there, imagine you are the first person to welcome Jessica, a new student at the school. So you're going to provide her some tips for making new friends, strategies for developing healthy friendships, and then you're going to assess your own skill in developing and maintaining a healthy friendship. What do you do well, and what could you do better? And the activity on the right, which is titled Rewrite the Story, the student will read the following scenarios, and this one is about Nikita, and identify what mistakes the person is doing to interfere with developing a healthy friendship. Then they'll rewrite the scenario with adding additional strategies to build and maintain healthy friendships. So my students love this activity, and I think students really can do this even in a remote learning environment and where maybe they don't have as often to see their friends. So I call this acts of kindness. So as a class, start by just kind of brainstorming what you could do in a friend, within like a relationship and a friendship that really starts to mean a lot. You know, those little things that you can do that really make a big difference. And so as a class, brainstorm acts of kindness that you could realistically do. Then I challenge my students to come up with 5 acts of kindness that they could realistically do and then go do them. And after these acts of kindness, the assignment states, write a few paragraphs summarizing how they positively impacted your friendship and peer relationship. Sometimes I like to modify things. Rather than a few paragraphs, I've had students do like a mind map where they wrote the friend's name in the middle and then just kind of branched off to them there looking like a mind map. Another option is students love to provide picture evidence. My students love to take selfies. So you could have the students document the 5 acts of kindness that they did and then just maybe write a few sentences or blurb about the act of kindness and how it has a positive impact on their friendship. So still on the topic of peer relationships, let's move on to empathy. How do you get students to practice empathy in a controlled classroom environment? So this is an activity from our high school program, and you can see that I've chopped it in half so that you can see both parts of the activity. But in the first part of the activity, students are going to read the following case study about Darshan and James. And the 2 friends, it appears as though Darshan is upset, but James does not seem to be noticing because he's distracted. So students are going to read the following scenario or case study, and then they're going to identify what 4 things James could do differently to show more empathy towards his friend. Now they're going to finish the script showing what they would do in a situation to show empathy and communicate effectively. So this is a good activity to kind of introduce empathy, but now let's take this skill a bit further. So in this activity titled Showing Support, I'm going to start by, and I'm trying to think in a remote learning environment, this could be quite challenging, but I think you can do it if you get students in teams of 3 in breakout rooms. But let me describe the activity first. So first, we're going to pass out this worksheet for each student, and I'm going to have each student read the following situation. So they're going to read the troubled friend. So for example, I'm so sick of feeling so horrible, this is never going to end. And I tell my students, imagine that a friend has just confided this feeling. And how can you be a supportive friend? How can you show support? How can you show empathy to this friend? So students would take, 7 or 8 minutes or so by themselves, and they would record their answers as the supportive friend. Now, in teams of 3, I'm going to assign an A, a B, and a C in teams of 3. Each student will have an opportunity to practice each of the following 3 roles. So, for example, student A, you're going to be the troubled friend. Student B, you're going to be the supportive friend who's going to show empathy and support. And student C, you're going to be the observer. So you're going to observe the conversation. You're not going to say anything, but you're going to use this rubric to see how student B does. How well does student B show support and empathy to their friend? And so allow a few minutes for that conversation to happen and student B to practice showing support. Stop the activity and then announce to the students that student C, I want you to debrief with student B and talk about what they did well to show support and empathy and maybe what could they have done differently. And it's perfectly fine for student A to listen because all students are learning through this activity. And then switch roles. Allow another student to practice being the troubled friend, the showing support, and then also the observer, so that each student has several opportunities to practice the different roles. So in the end, students are going to answer the following reflection questions. Was it more difficult to be the person in trouble or be the supportive friend? And which part of the rubric do you feel most confident in performing, and which criteria did you find most difficult to master? And you can go back and take a closer look at this later, but this is just one of the rubrics that we developed for this activity. So we've talked a lot about peer relationships. Let's move on to family relationships, especially in those middle and high school years. Often students will, at least my students have talked about that there's conflict. There's conflict about family rules. There's conflict among siblings. It's kind of, you're at that age where you're craving freedom, but yet you're feeling that there's so many restrictions. So I like to talk about those. And actually, I find that with a partner, doing these kinds of activities with a partner is really serves my students well, because they have an opportunity to talk with classmates. So if students their own age, they can identify with them, and they can also realize that they're not the only ones experiencing this kind of conflict. And so in the activity on the left-hand side, with a partner, students are going to read the following scenarios about families in conflict and decide how they can positively respond to conflict to encourage a healthy relationship. So allow maybe 7 or 8 minutes for them to talk about each of the scenarios, and then what would you do in that situation? After 7 or 8 minutes, allow time for students to share out and share their responses so that their classmates can get some ideas on ways that they could maybe more positively respond to conflict in their family. The activity on the right-hand side is one of the activities from our high school book, and the students are going to read the following scenarios and then give advice on how either the two siblings or the child and the adult can resolve conflict. You can see that there's several different, some of it's between parents, a child and his parent, a child and the siblings, or you can see the last scenario relates to grandparents as well. So continuing on the topic of family relationships, moving on to effective communication and really stressing the importance of assertive communication. So in this activity, students are going to start by reading the following scenario. So Kyle's parents insist that he is in bed, lights out, 10 p.m. Now that he's in high school, Kyle thinks that he should be able to decide when he goes to sleep, especially on the weekends. He's trustworthy and gets good grades. So in part one, students are going to look at the different types of communication styles. So if Kyle decides to address this with his parents and he uses a passive communication style, what might happen? What's the result of the conversation? How about if he comes at the conversation in an aggressive style, or passive aggressive or assertive? What might happen? So we do know that assertive communication is the best form of communication to use. So in part two, we're going to take a closer look at assertive communication. So, and for these, they'll answer the following questions. When Kyle will talk with his parents, they're going to develop a plan. What Kyle might say, develop the plan. Why the situation is a problem, and then you really want to use the I statements, getting students to take ownership of this emotion by saying, I feel. How Kyle would like to solve the problem. And then once students are done with the activity, getting them to think and reflect. I love this question number 2, is if it was applied to you personally, do you think your parents would agree to change the rule? Why or why not? If you use the assertive communication. So I mentioned earlier in this presentation that I was going to provide a couple different opportunities of the Let's Talk homework assignments. So this is another one, and this one is titled Let's Talk Relationships. And this one really emphasizes and gets a child and a trusted adult to talk about forming positive, healthy relationships in their lives and working through conflict and other issues in a healthy way. So moving on to dating relationships. So the activity on my the left-hand side, Dear Special Someone, is actually one of my favorite activities. I've done this activity for years, and I actually use this activity as a warm-up. So on the first day where we start to talk about dating relationships, or what does it mean to be in a healthy and unhealthy relationship, I have my students do this as a journal write. So I tell them to pull out a piece of paper, and I want you to write a letter to someone special. And it could be someone that you want to be in a dating relationship in the future, if you're not dating today or have no intention of dating today. But it's someone who you're potentially interested in a dating relationship. So I want you to talk about those characteristics or qualities that you want in a dating relationship. Maybe what are your boundaries or limits? And in this activity, what I really want my students to do is I really want them to start to set expectations. What do they want out of a dating relationship? What does it mean to be in a healthy relationship? And often most of my journal writes are pretty short, 5 minutes, I guess. This one I actually do allow for extra time. And what you'll find is when you tell students to start writing, some students have a very difficult time even starting to write. And it's probably because they've not thought of their expectations or what they really wanted in a dating relationship. So it is helpful. I actually wrote my own Dear Special Someone, I guess 18 years ago. And so I'll read the first couple lines of mine to kind of help them get started. But I do tell them that I am not going to take this up. I am not going to grade it. You don't have to read it to anybody else, but I am going to ask you to do something special with this letter when you're done with it. And it's not a grade. And I love how many students, that they are intrinsically motivated to write it because they are intrigued with what they're going to do with it. And also, I think it is important for them, and I think they realize it's important for them to start to think of their expectations. So allow students to write. And then maybe after 10 minutes or so, try to bring the activity to a close. You are going to have students to say, I'm not done, I need to keep writing. I've got such great ideas. When you bring the activity to a close, you can ask the students, does anybody want to share theirs? But don't put any pressure. Most of the time I have maybe 1 or 2 students who want to read a part of their letter or either the entire letter. In some classes I've had where no student wants to volunteer, and that's perfectly fine. And if you do have no students, you can just say, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go around and each person is just going to state one quality they really want in someone special one day. So you go around and they state their expectations. And to close the activity, I tell my students, I want you to take that piece of paper and I want you to fold it up. And I want you to take it home with you and I want you to go put it in a special place. Maybe it's in the back of your underwear drawer or your sock drawer or under your mattress, because at some point in time in your middle or high school years or into your college years, you may be in a relationship or kind of stuck in a love bubble where you don't really know if it's a good situation for you, but you're so stuck that you're having a difficult time seeing clearly. So pull out your letter, read your letter, and see if this is really the type of relationship you want to be in. In my 15 years of teaching, on several occasions, students have come up to me years later and said, Miss McCarley, I read my letter and what was I thinking? I was in that relationship way too long. I'm out now and I'm so much happier. So I love that students were intrinsically motivated to do those kind of activities. The activity on the right, enforcing your boundaries, is just a great activity. I would actually have students do this with a partner anytime they have an opportunity to talk about these kind of scenarios that might be a little bit awkward to talk about. I really look forward to those opportunities in a controlled classroom environment. I figure better talk about it in the classroom before they're actually in these situations. So when they're in the situations in real life, they'll have a bit more confidence to assertively communicate their boundaries, assertively communicate no. And then there's some reflection question below. So let's move on to our last skill, which is the skill of self-management. So let's start with I statements and managing emotions, especially in those middle and high school years. It can be those times where you just feel like your emotions are all over the place. And it's really easy to blame those negative emotions on someone else. For example, you make me so mad. And I really try to teach my students to change that to an I statement. So you can kind of take ownership of this negative emotion, and as a result of taking ownership, start to manage it. So rather than you make me so mad, I feel angry when, or I feel mad when. So the first activity is getting students to look at you statements and changing them to I statements. So this is a short little hands-on activity I do with my students, where with a partner, they're going to read the following statements and change them from you statements to I statements. Continuing to have students practicing managing their emotions, now we can have them look at several different scenarios where they're expressing emotion to a different type of person. So for example, a group of your closest friends are having a sleepover and you are not invited. So how can you assertively communicate using an I statement while expressing your negative emotion, but taking ownership of it rather than blaming somebody? Or a dating partner pressures you to lie to your parents to hang out. This volleyball season, you feel like your parents are putting a lot of pressure on you to excel, which is creating stress and anxiety. So I really try to create as many different types of scenarios that put students in situations where they're having to express these I statements to different types of people. So I wanted to provide another example. So if you remember earlier, I talked about these desserts. So the desserts are part of a bigger project. And now we're going to practice using I statements. So I just want to show this because sometimes it's hard to differentiate instruction. And this one is differentiated by learning style. So students can kind of practice this skill in a learning environment that best suits their needs. So for each one in the scenario, the person should clearly express the emotion using two I statements. So sorry about that, I missed this. So write a scenario in which one person feels angry within a friendship. The person should clearly express this emotion using two I statements. So remember, the two students who kind of want to quietly practice by themselves and not do any performing for the class will choose option number one. Option number two, they'll raise their hand and state it for the class, but no skit. And option number three are going to be the two students who really want to kind of stand up in front of the class and do a skit, and this is how they learn. So I have a few other activities I just kind of wanted to add to it so that you guys can kind of go back, take a closer look. This is a great activity from our high school program, working on the skill of practicing health-enhancing behaviors and also encouraging positive self-talk as a way of helping students manage their emotions. So students will read the following statements of negative self-talk, and then they will change it to positive self-talk. So I wanted to, as I mentioned, provide several different examples of these Let's Talk series, and this is a great one on Let's Talk self-esteem and emotions. So you can go back and take a closer look at this later. They're all set up, at least in our middle school program, they're all set up in a very similar format. The high school program also has these. It's just they're set up in a bit different format, but all of them do have a pledge. And this was actually, I just wanted to show you an example from the high school program. But you can take a closer look at this later. So this is, I know we've been talking about managing emotions. This is a really fun activity you could actually do. You could do with your students today in a remote learning environment, but getting them to manage healthy food decisions. So in this activity, you can see right here, it says, are you up for the challenge? You're going to challenge yourself for 5 days to improve your diet in one particular way. So just get them to really think about one way I can improve. Maybe it's drinking more water or eating more fruits and veggies, or eating breakfast every day, or whatever it is. So getting them to identify an area that needs improvement. So students will start by writing a short-term SMART goal. And you can see that it kind of walks them through the SMART steps. And then from there, for 5 days, they're going to reflect on each day. So each day, they're basically going to write a journal, and they're going to reflect on the following questions at the end of each day. Were you successful in sticking to your goal today? How did you feel at the end of the day? Why do you think you felt this way? How hard was it for you to stick to your goal today? Why? Was anyone a positive influence on you sticking with your goal? Was anyone a negative influence? And do you think you can get used to this change you are making? Why or why not? So for each day, students are going to respond to the following questions in a journal entry. My students always love to do like some sort of picture evidence or selfies of themselves doing this food challenge. So that's a fun option as well. So the students can kind of attach those pictures to each day of their reflections. And if you like this idea and you kind of like this format, you could do a really similar activity with getting students to manage their stress, or even fitness-related activity. So this is one that's a very similar activity. It's the whole idea of getting students to add either physical activity or exercise to their lives. Challenge them. Maybe you challenge them, just like this activity is, challenge them to do it for 5 days. Or if you want to extend the time, but each day, maybe use these same types of questions and get them to reflect on the day. So these would be 2 great activities you could do in a remote learning environment. So I want to end with this. This is actually my favorite activity from the entire PowerPoint, and one that would work really, really well in a remote learning environment. So this is a wellness action plan template, and it was one that I developed for our middle school program. And I really wanted to kind of keep it generic enough so that teachers could use it for any type of behavior. So first, I do think it is really important to kind of go over the instructions with the student. So basically what this is a 2-week behavior change project. So you want students to kind of think about their current health behaviors. If they are going to either implement a new behavior or they can change an existing behavior. So if they have some existing behaviors that's interfering with the quality of their health and their life, you want them to change those behaviors. But if they don't really, have a lot of those behaviors, they're not smoking, they're not vaping, they're not doing drugs, they're not drinking alcohol, you can get them to start a new behavior, maybe related to stress management. But it's really important for you to go over with your students that they're not being graded on how successful they are. They are being graded on their behavior change attempt, their wellness action plan, and the description of their experience during and after their wellness action plan. They're not being graded on their success or lack of success with this attempt at changing this behavior. So in step 1, they're going to identify the behavior. What behavior are they changing, or what behavior are they going to start? Step 2, they're going to learn about the behavior. So they're going to research accurate, up-to-date, valid sources to learn more about this behavior. And they're going to identify what steps I can take to reach my goal. Step 3, they're going to start planning for change. Why do you want to change this behavior? They're going to develop a SMART goal. How will you involve your family and friends? What obstacles or problems could you encounter? How will you measure and evaluate success? Now it's time to enter week 1. They'll take their SMART goal, transfer it here, and then they're going to come up with their action steps. So let me go to the next slide so you can see those action steps. So this is where they're going to come up with their action steps to meet their goal. And they may just have 3. Just because there's 6 boxes doesn't mean they have to have 6 action steps. I just wanted to provide enough so that students had the chance to write additional action steps. But 3 would be fine. So they'll come up with 3 action steps, and then each day over 7 days, they're going to try to do that step. And if they do, you can see from the directions here, they're going to give themselves a smiley face or a check mark on the days that they complete that action step. So this is the point you really want to emphasize to them. They're not being graded on how many smiley faces they get or check marks, because you don't want students to lie and just kind of like quickly do it just to get a grade. And each day they're just going to record just some quick thoughts, feelings, emotions, successes, failures, what they're thinking or feeling that day and trying to reach the goal. Now let's enter week 2. So before they enter week 2, they're going to want to look at their steps. Which ones did I like? Maybe I like this first one. So if I like the first one, I'm going to transfer it over here. Maybe action step number 2 didn't really work for me, so I don't want to transfer that one. I'm going to come up either with a new step, or I can modify an existing step. So they're going to come up with their steps and once again follow the same format. And then they're going to record their successes, their failures, their frustrations from each day. And last but not least, once they're done with the 2-week experience, they're going to reflect. So describe your experience in trying to accomplish your goal. Describe what this experience taught you about your success. Taught you about yourself. Consider your successes, your failures, and emotions throughout the week. Discuss what you learned about making a healthy behavior change. Do you plan on continuing this behavior? Why or why not? And I did provide the assessment scale or the rubric that I use to assess my students in case you needed one. So I know this was a lot of information, and I really do appreciate you guys allowing me to present. If you guys do have questions, you're more than welcome to send me a quick email. Let me go back to the first screen because I want to make sure Rick's information is there. So everything you saw today is from our middle school and our high school health program, our 2021 copyright skills-based resource. And you guys do have access to this PowerPoint presentation. As a publishing company, we want to share our resources. We want teachers to try them out in their classroom and get ideas and see if maybe one day it could be a good fit for their classroom. So I wanted to put Rick's information back on the screen again. If you guys are interested in getting a free copy of the textbook or checking out the online access, just send Rick a quick email and he'll be able to get those resources to you. Just make sure you state whether it's middle school or high school that you're interested in. And then also he'll probably ask you, we have 2 versions. We have a version that includes the sexual health chapters, and we also have a version that does not include those sexual health chapters. So he'll probably ask you if you want that version as well. So I really do appreciate your time in allowing me to present. Were there any questions from the group?
There's not anything in the chat box, Mary, but there was something about the link from another Mary. But does anybody want to come off mute? Does anybody have any questions now? No.
Hopefully I didn't overwhelm everybody with, I know it was a lot, but the idea is that you can go back and look at it. And most of the ideas that I used in my classroom, I sat at conferences, I took notes, and I kind of went back and changed them and made them my own. And so I hope that you guys did get maybe a couple ideas from today's presentation that you guys can take back to your classroom. So thank you guys so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you'll be able to take the screen.
Thanks a lot, Mary. Thanks, Rick. Have a great day, everyone.